So on this day, 75 years ago, the United Nations was formed. Among the organization's goals was the achievement of peace across the world. This year's anniversary comes at a time of great disruption due to the coronavirus pandemic and, of course, several conflicts across the world. Let's reflect then on the United Nations anniversary with Professor John Stremlau. He's with Wits University, joining us by Skype from Johannesburg tonight. Prof, always great to have you on. So, the average 75-year-old is usually dealing with a long list of ailments. Is it the same for the United Nations?
The United Nations is a remarkable institution that was set up in 1945, as you say. It's younger than I am, and that's important to remember because its membership in those days was only 51 states. Now there are 193, so that means I'm older than 3/4 of the sovereign states that make up the international system. And I think we are good to reflect on this history because the main purpose of the United Nations was to prevent World War III, and that has not occurred. And so while it's difficult to prove a prevention, it has helped, and therefore that's a major importance to all of the world. But what we see today is that most of the wars that you refer to are within states. We don't have the norms or the institutions or the political resolve to deal with those internal problems. Indeed, the very first country that was considered a threat to international peace and security because of its internal problems was South Africa under apartheid. That was a major breakthrough. And what we see now on the agenda of the UN is really about human rights concerns, one of the third pillar of the UN, which has not been institutionalized. The Declaration of Human Rights was issued in 1948. And then the second pillar is the development pillar of the international financial institutions, which have also been important but need to be reformed. So let's take a deep breath and be thankful that we've had the United Nations for 75 years, but don't expect it to do things which it was not intended to do. It's a states' rights institution, not a human rights institution.
And just on that point then, Professor, you've got the United Nations, 193 member states, as you were saying. The world has new problems, old problems that resurface ever so often. Just this week, you look at the situation in Guinea, you look at the situation in Nigeria. At the beginning of the month, we were looking at the tension between Armenia and Azerbaijan. When you look then at that growing list of issues that need to be tackled by world leaders, is it that the problems are simply too many to rest on the shoulders of one organization?
Well, we have to be realistic in the sense that except for the last conflict, all of the conflicts are really essentially internal conflicts. The Organization of African Unity has become the African Union in part out of recognition that African states cannot be indifferent about each other's internal affairs. Today's human rights abusers are tomorrow's refugees, and that's destabilizing. But again, I repeat, the governments of the world really want to have an international system that is based on sovereign equality, states' rights, not on human rights. I looked at the film, which I commend to you. There's a website for the 75th anniversary, and there's a wonderful film. And really the problems that the UN is grappling with today, they weren't intended to address when it was created. They are all largely internal, human problems like COVID. Specialized agencies like the WHO were brought in later, and they really need to be strengthened. But again, these are all problems affecting people. It's about human rights, not states' rights. The South African Constitution is one of the few in the world which it really does privilege human rights over sovereign or federal rights like the United States Constitution. Democracies are in a process of being under stress, but the UN is not equipped to deal with these problems.
The United Nations, especially the Security Council, gets a lot of flack, of course, because of the P5 structure, Europe, China, the Russians and the like. What is your take on the power that they have within the United Nations platform?
Well, the problem problem with the Security Council. It was set up by the victors of World War II, as you know, and again, we have not had a major interstate conflict that we all feared, or that our predecessors feared in 1945. And that's great, but the Security Council is outdated. The political resolve to change that Security Council, to make it more representative of the peoples of the world, has not yet coalesced. And, you know, everyone talks about the need to deal with problems like pandemics or environmental change. We don't have the institutions yet that have enough authority to actually make those differences. They have to be negotiated, so that when South Africa makes an appeal for collective action, it has to be structured as best you can around the threat, which is climate change, so you have the Paris Accords. But you can't expect the United Nations Security Council, with the divisions between the major powers, Europe, China, Russia, the United States, to really function effectively. You know, the institution needs to be reformed, but the political resolve is not yet there. So what we're doing in Africa is very creative in the African Union, and engaging China and engaging the United States. But I think it will be regional largely from now on in, as we grapple with things like environment and like the pandemics.
The issue then, Prof, becomes that the regional bodies are often criticized for not having enough teeth, or not acting because the statesmen, for example, enjoy particular relationships. So what hope is there of a proper alternative regionally in our lifetime, at least?
Well, you know, we are all grappling with the pandemic, and there will be more pandemics. And it does focus the mind when you have a problem like a pandemic. So that I think what we'll see is ad hoc arrangements, like we have for the vaccines, with the 100 nations signing up to be a sharing. And you're going to have outliers like Trump's America that says, I want to make this for our people only. That's unfortunate, and it may be for the Americans to sort out in their next election. But in fact, I think people realize more and more that the real threats to the planet, like climate change, have to be dealt with politically, through consensus, through arrangements that are ad hoc to the threat that we now agree we must act on. So the Paris Climate Change Accord was a step forward. It's not fast enough. The UN, in its declaration for the 75th, which I commend to you, you should read, is really a list of what are the world's problems today, and they look very, very different than when the United Nations was established in 1945. And the United Nations institutionally has not caught up with these problems because governments who own the United Nations don't want to do it.
Professor John Stremlau speaking to us in the middle of a thunderstorm here in Johannesburg. Thank you so much for your time tonight.